Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, January 31st. Both Washington and Ottawa were stirring today in the lead up to Donald Trump's 25% tariffs, which as of last night were proceeding as planned.
So we'll be announcing the tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a number of reasons. Number one is the people that have poured into our country so horribly and so much. Number two are the drugs, fentanyl, and everything else that have come into the country. And number three are the massive subsidies that we're giving to Canada and to Mexico in the form of deficits. And I'll be putting the tariff of 25% on Canada and separately 25% on Mexico. And we will really have to do that because we have very big deficits with those countries. Those tariffs may or may not rise with time.
However, Reuters reported this afternoon that new tariffs against Canada and Mexico will begin on March 1st and will exclude a process for countries to seek specific exemptions for certain imports. But in response to Reuters' report, Donald Trump's White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt called that report false.
Friends at Reuters are reporting that the president has made a decision on the Canada and Mexico tariffs, but that they won't actually be implemented until March 1st. I was wondering if you could confirm that and talk through some of the president's thinking there.
I saw that report and it is false. I was just with the president in the Oval Office, and I can confirm that tomorrow, the February 1st deadline that President Trump put into place at a statement several weeks ago continues. The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country, which has killed tens of millions of Americans. These are promises made and promises kept by the president.
This morning at the Council on Canada-U.S. Relations, the Prime Minister responded directly to Donald Trump, saying that Canada is ready with a response.
I'm glad you've all joined me today because we're in a critical moment. As President Trump stated yesterday, he is still committed to placing tariffs on Canada starting as early as tomorrow, possibly. Now, we don't know precisely what that could look like, but I do know two things. First, if the president does choose to implement any tariffs against Canada, we're ready with a response. A purposeful, forceful, but reasonable, immediate response. It's not what we want, but if he moves forward, we will also act.
Prime Minister Trudeau also outlined how the federal government is responding to Trump's complaints about the U.S.-Canada border.
At the same time, our government has responded to what the president is focused on and what is motivating him to consider applying tariffs as early as tomorrow, the flow of fentanyl and illegal crossings into the United States. Now, let me reiterate it. Our border is safe and secure, and less than 1% of fentanyl and illegal crossings into the United States come from Canada. We're committed to keeping it that way by addressing current challenges and strengthening our capacity. That's why we're implementing the $1.3 billion border plan we announced late last year. In fact, the first patrol helicopters began monitoring the border earlier this week, and new canine teams along with imaging tools are being deployed to detect and stop the flow of fentanyl. Meanwhile, our previously implemented border measures are already showing results, too. We've ended the practice of flagpoling when temporary residents travel to the United States only to immediately return to Canada to access immigration services, a decision that's saving Canadian and American border officials time and resources. And we're bringing in heightened security for visa applications, which has resulted in an 89% drop in illegal crossings by foreign citizens to the United States in the second half of last year. This is real progress. As the President's Commerce Secretary nominee acknowledged the other day, it demonstrates that we are committed to the Canada-U.S. relationship, committed to upholding the safety and security of our shared border.
A trio of the Prime Minister's cabinet ministers were in Washington today, attempting to stop U.S. President Donald Trump from imposing economically devastating tariffs on Canadian imports. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, Public Safety Minister David McGuinty, and Immigration Minister Mark Miller are all stateside, hoping to win enough support from Republican lawmakers to help sway the president. All right, up next, Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith was on TV in the U.S., highlighting how serious the province is taking the issue of drug and border security. And Nova Scotia MP Jaime Batiste has withdrawn from the Liberal leadership race. We'll have these stories and more news right after the break. Stay with us. Yesterday, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith appeared on Newsmax in the U.S. to highlight how serious the province is taking the issue of drugs and border security.
I mean, we were one of the first to announce our own border security plan. Keep in mind, in our jurisdiction, we have some policing functions and border functions that are federal, and then some policing functions that are provincial. And at the provincial level, we deployed special teams to be able to go to the border sheriffs who are going to be armed with border dogs so that they can do the sniffer test to see if there's any drugs. They're going to be trained in commercial vehicle inspection. We've got 10 drones that are all-weather drones, and the federal government has added a Black Hawk helicopter, which has started patrolling our border as of yesterday. There were news stories about it. We did take a news team down yesterday so that they could see what we're deploying, and we're making those images available. But we are serious. You'll probably see in the news as well. We finally prosecuted three individuals behind a fentanyl super lab, and they got 18 years in jail. And so we're taking this seriously. We've got a couple of other major super labs that our law enforcement in Alberta have busted, and I hope to see the same results. We don't want our people killed by these bad guys either. And so we've been taking action on this for a number of years now, and we want to work with our American partners to show how serious we are.
Newfoundland and Labrador is the latest province rolling out its plan for U.S. tariffs.
I have to say it's a united Team Newfoundland and Labrador approach that understands the value of a united Team Canada approach. And while we all recognize the acuity of the current fiscal situation and economic impacts that could be realized if President Trump goes ahead with these tariffs, there is a substantive and real understanding of the value of the Canadian identity, sovereignty, and the fact that that cannot be eroded to meet the acute fiscal need. But we are very hopeful that the President understands that this will be equally punishing to Americans. I think you saw yesterday in Mr. Lutnick's confirmation hearings that there was some ability to have different timelines associated with different measures. And we are hopeful that the collective voice of Newfoundland and Labrador that is represented at this table will be able to be heard between February 1st and April to ensure that the President and his sphere of influencers understand the fiscal and economic impact that this will have on Americans.
Premier Andrew Furey says his province is working on a campaign to encourage people to buy local and buy Canadian. Mr. Furey says he'd also like to see the federal government launch a COVID-style relief package to help workers affected by tariffs. Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney has called the existing consumer carbon pricing policy divisive.
Canadians have had more than enough of such division and confusion. With Canada now under attack, it is time to come together. And since Canada's current climate policy has become too divisive, it's time for a new, more effective climate plan that everyone can get behind. It's a plan that makes our economy more competitive, it grows good jobs today, and it will grow better ones in the future. You know, friends, there are literally billions of dollars of investment on the table and millions of jobs at stake. So here's how our new plan works. My government will immediately remove the consumer carbon tax. But we won't stop there. Instead, what we'll do is create a system of incentives to reward Canadians for making greener choices. So it means that you'll no longer have to pay more to fuel your car or heat your home. But when you choose an energy-efficient appliance or an electric car or home insulation, you will be rewarded, and we will get the big polluters to pay for it.
But Mr. Carney still intends to keep industrial carbon pricing in place. The former Bank of Canada governor is in the running to become the new party leader who will be elected on March 9th. Jaime Batiste is pulling out of the running for the Liberal leadership. The Nova Scotia MP announced he's dropping out and throwing his support behind former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney. Mr. Battiste's campaign confirmed on Thursday that he's endorsing Mr. Carney's bid. His departure reduces the field of candidates to 5. Meanwhile, Liberal leadership hopeful Karina Gold is stressing that the price of food and household basics has to come down for Canadians. Ms. Gold is pitching to slash the GST by a full point for a year to give struggling Canadians some tax relief. She also said she'd like to boost the corporate tax rate for companies earning over $500 million in profits. Stay tuned. Up next, we'll be joined by Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after the break. Now it's time for our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. All yours, Dan.
Well, thank you, Teresa. And of course, all eyes are focused on what the U.S. will be doing, President Trump, in terms of any tariffs or sanctions on Canada. And of course, involved in the 3 areas that tend to be more noticeable. That is, of course, drug cartels operating in Canada and sending their products south of the border, particularly fentanyl. The next one, of course, migration, concerns about undocumented and suspicious people making their way to the United States to do some damage. And of course, the one that doesn't get a lot of discussion, supply management. So however this bounces out and whether it's going to be over several months, it's clear that one thing is going to have to be considered here. First and foremost, the value of the Canadian dollar. It has lost a bit of power this week, 143, now 145, 145 pennies to buy a US dollar. That means a slight increase in gas prices, although in the last week we've seen gas prices across Canada and diesel drop, mostly the result of warmer weather and, of course, feeling from the President Trump that he's going to drill a lot more oil, therefore we're not going to need these products as much as we did before, or at least there's going to be a greater supply of it. Whatever the case should be, it looks like the uncertainty around what implications are for the Trump administration's tariffs on Canada will weigh very heavily in the direction of oil. It could go either way. Oil could go up because, of course, a sanction, but of course, the tariff would also mean less oil being sold. Therefore, there'd be a glut of oil, at least on the Canadian side. So the theory holds, despite the weakness in the Canadian dollar. We'd also have to look at other factors which aren't really geopolitical beyond our 2 borders or beyond the 2 countries in our shared border. And that's normally we concern ourselves with demand globally in China, demand in Europe, etc. Those things will be put on the side for the week ahead. So I'm basically calling this week a bit of a neutral move. It won't go up, it won't go down, as we try to digest whether or not the tariffs take place immediately or whether they'll be over a period of 7 months, and whether they can be addressed, in fact, before they take effect, whenever that period of time should be over the next few months. I'm not expecting this to be a draconian, immediate impact, but again, I have no basis on which to make a claim either way. I'm not in Donald Trump's head, so I don't know how this is going to turn out. I do know that his advisors are trying to provide him as much data and information that brings things up to reality as far as how energy prices and as far as sanctions are concerned or tariffs are concerned. We use the word sanctions because that's in fact what the Americans are trying to do. Now, having said all this, it looks like oil may be exempted. If that's the case, then of course everything just continues as normal. But it has highlighted, Teresa, the fact that Canada really missed the boat and spent too much time virtue signaling over climate change, blocking pipelines and putting emission caps on industry. However that is perceived by people on both sides of this debate, the reality is that we are not living up to the expectations of our partners, both on natural gas and oil, who've asked Canada, many of them, that Canada provided long before the United States or any other country for that matter. And we've said there's no business case. That's a pretty hard pill to swallow for most Canadians now. We're finding our standard of living is declining. Debts are increasing, not just their own personal debts, but the national debt, sub-sovereign debt. And we are looking at some really crazy ideas, like, for instance, giving everybody a check as we did during the COVID period of time, which will likely put the Canadian economy into an absolute recession, which would put us beyond the reach of reduction in interest rates as we borrow more money. The reality, however, is more and well beyond the issue of energy, although it has been in the past a very strong, important card for Canada to play in these kind of negotiations. The reality is that Canada rooked itself on the East Coast and the West Coast by preventing pipelines from being built. And when we did build one, it's because we allowed lawfare to go after the integrity of our permitting process. That's why you and I are on the hook for $34 billion to build a Trans Mountain pipeline when Kinder Morgan would have built it for zero. How do you think that's going to look on the books when you got $1.3 trillion debts in terms of a national debt now that you've had to add more to it and everything else? It seems that this is a government that's taking the position that you can spend with abandon, you can offer people money. And we see this not just federally, but also here in the province of Ontario, the Ford government saying, yeah, we made a big mistake on the EVs and this is going to be really bad. We're going to give everybody a check to sit at home. Well, the reality is that that's borrowed money, and that's borrowed money on the backs of ourselves as taxpayers, our children and their grandchildren.
Thanks for that, Dan. All right, when we come back from the break, the Canadian economy shrinks 0.2% in November. Doug Ford says he will honor Ontario's EV commitment if he is re-elected. U.S. President Trump's cabinet nominees get grilled in back-to-back-to-back confirmation hearings, and the NTSB recovers the voice and data records from the plane that collided with an Army helicopter on Wednesday night in Washington, D.C. Stay with us. Forum Daily will return shortly. The Canadian economy shrank in November. Statistics Canada says the real GDP decreased in 0.2% during the month, the largest monthly contraction since December 2023. Goods-producing industries contracted 0.6%, with the mining, oil and gas extraction, and utilities sectors driving most of the decline. However, the agency says its preliminary estimate for December points to an increase of 0.2% for the final month of the year, suggesting an annualized growth rate of 1.8% in the fourth quarter of 2024. Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford says he will honor Ontario's electric vehicle commitment if he is re-elected.
Even if President Trump tears up America's commitment to the auto industry, we will not. I want to make it clear to every partner we have in Ontario's electric vehicle and battery supply chain, a re-elected PC government will honor our commitment to invest in the sector, no matter what decision the U.S. makes about the Inflation Reduction Act. We will maintain our financial contributions to the electric vehicle and battery auto pack. A landmark agreement that is attracting game-changing investments, that's creating thousands of jobs, that's bringing hope back to communities across Ontario.
The Ford government agreed to an auto pact with Ottawa in 2023 to pay 1/3 of production incentives in a deal with Volkswagen, Stellantis, and LG Energy Solution. The two governments combined the money to compete with former U.S. President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. Mr. Ford says he'll keep his commitment to the EV sector, even if U.S. President Donald Trump ends a subsidy program. President Donald Trump's most controversial cabinet nominees have flooded the zone in back-to-back-to-back confirmation hearings. Conspiracy theories about vaccines, secret meetings with dictators, and an enemies list. It was a blockbuster showing like nothing the Senate has seen in modern memory. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel all face grilling over their views and promises in testy exchanges.
Do you believe, as the chairman of this committee believes, as the vast majority of members of our intelligence agencies believe, that Edward Snowden was a traitor to the United States of America?
Senator, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I will work with you to make sure that there is not another Snowden-like leak.
Media. It's not a moment to propagate theories, conspiracy theories, or attacks on journalism in the United States.
Are you a conspiracy theorist? That is a pejorative, Senator, that's applied to me. Mainly to keep me from asking difficult questions of powerful interests. I was told that I was a conspiracy theorist. That label was applied to me because I said that the vaccines, the COVID vaccine, didn't prevent transmission and it wouldn't prevent infection, when the government was telling people, Americans, that it would.
Will you work with me on this issue so we know who worked with Jeffrey Epstein in building these sex trafficking rings?
Absolutely, Senator. Child sex trafficking has no place in the United States of America, and I will do everything, if confirmed as FBI director, to make sure the American public knows the full weight of what happened in the past.
The National Transportation Safety Board says it's recovered the voice and data records from the plane that collided with an Army helicopter on Wednesday night in Washington, D.C.
We're here to assure the American people that we are going to leave no stone unturned in this investigation. We are going to conduct a thorough investigation of this entire tragedy, looking at the facts. Now, with that, I want to level set. When we go to the scene, and we were here last night, we allow the responders to do their important safety mission, which in this case was search and rescue and recovery. We stand back to allow them to do their important safety mission. And so this, for us, is our first full day on scene with our entire crew coming together. We have about nearly 50 people on scene, and in addition to our resources back at headquarters in our labs and throughout the agency.
Federal investigators hope the so-called black boxes will help piece together the moments before the collision, including any communication between the two aircraft and air traffic controllers. All 67 people on board the American Airlines regional carrier and the helicopter were killed in America's worst aviation disaster in a generation. I'm Teresa Skubic, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.